Welcome to USA Stories channel that we hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. Have you ever had a feeling that something was off but you couldn't quite put your finger on it? That's how I felt when I started noticing my dad Leo's strange behavior late at night. It wasn't just the way he acted. It was the things he started doing that made me question everything I knew about him. Every night at exactly midnight, my dad Leo would sneak out of the house, always in a hurry, always looking over his shoulder like he was afraid someone might see him. But no matter how many times I tried to ask him what was going on, he'd brush it off with a quick excuse, as if nothing was wrong. I believed him at first, but then one night I couldn't ignore it anymore. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow him. What I discovered sent chills down my spine and opened up a whole world I never thought existed. Before this story spirals even further, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications for more. And when the story ends, don't forget to show your support through likes and comments. My dad Leo, the man I'd looked up to my whole life, was hiding something dark, something that would change everything I thought I knew about him. The meetings he'd been attending every midnight weren't just casual gatherings. They were secret, and they were dangerous. As I followed him through the dark streets, my heart pounded in my C*******T, and every step felt like a step closer to something terrifying. I watched him enter an old abandoned building on the edge of town. There I saw figures standing in the shadows, their faces hidden. My dad Leo was one of them, now involved in something that felt like a nightmare. What could be so important that he'd risk everything for it? Why had he kept it from me for so long? I wanted to turn back, but I couldn't. I needed to know what was happening. I crept closer, trying to stay out of sight as the voices inside grew louder. I could make out some words, but they didn't make sense about a hidden truth about protecting something or someone. As the tension grew, I felt like I was about to stumble onto something I wasn't meant to see. I couldn't believe what was happening, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. Was my dad Leo involved in something illegal? Was he part of a dangerous group, or was this something even worse? I had no idea, but one thing was clear. My world was about to change forever. The truth was out there, but could I handle it? Would I ever be able to look at my dad, Leo, the same way again? What was he hiding from me? And more importantly, why stay tuned, because the answers I uncovered that night, well, they terrified me in ways I can't even begin to describe. The rest of the story is even darker than you can imagine. I stood frozen outside that abandoned, building my breath shallow as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. My dad Leo, my kind, hard-working dad Leo, was standing among a group of people whose faces I couldn't fully make out in the dim light. Their voices were hushed, but the urgency in their tone was clear. They weren't just talking, they were planning something. I pressed myself against the cold brick wall, straining to hear a single light bulb flickered above them, casting eerie shadows that made the scene feel even more unreal. I caught snippets of their conversation, words like deadline and consequences, but none of it made sense. Then one of the figures handed my dad Leo a thick envelope. He hesitated before taking it, gripping it tightly like it was something valuable. Or dangerous. My stomach churned. What was he caught up in? This wasn't just a secret club or a late-night hobby. There was something much deeper happening here, something he had gone to great lengths to hide from me. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was he in trouble? Was he being forced into something? Or an even scarier thought, was he choosing to be part of this? I stepped back, my heart pounding in my ears. That's when my foot landed on a loose piece of gravel. It crunched loudly beneath me, the sound cutting through the silence like a gunshot. My breath hitched, the talking inside stopped. Panic surged through me as I pressed myself harder against the wall, praying they hadn't heard, but I knew better. My dad Leo had always been sharp. He could sense when something was off. I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone was coming to check. My whole body tensed as I weighed my options: run and risk being seen, stay and pray. They didn't look too closely. The door creaked open, just a crack. A figure stepped out, scanning the darkness. I held my breath, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. But after a long moment, the figure muttered something under their breath and stepped back inside, pulling the door shut behind them. I exhaled shakily. That was too close. I knew I couldn't stay any longer. I had pushed my luck enough. But as I hurried home, my mind swirled with questions. My dad, Leo, had always been my rock, the person I trusted most in the world. But after tonight, I wasn't sure if I even knew him at all. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flickering light, the shadows of the people standing around my dad Leo. The way he clutched that envelope, like his life depended on it. What was inside? Money instructions, a threat. My mind spun with theories, each one worse than the last. At breakfast the next morning, I watched my dad Leo carefully. He acted normal, too normal. He smiled like he always did, asked me about school, sipped his coffee without a care in the world. But now I saw the little things I had missed before, the way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for his mug, the way his eyes darted toward the clock like he was counting down the hours until midnight. I wanted to ask him outright to demand the truth, but I hesitated. If he had been hiding this from me, there had to be a reason, and if I confronted him too soon, I might lose my chance to find out the full story. Instead, I decided to take a different approach. I'd start paying attention, watching, gathering pieces of the puzzle until I could figure out what was really going on. That night I waited again, hidden in my room with the lights off, listening for the sound of his footsteps. Right on schedule, just before midnight, I heard the front door creak open. He was leaving again, but this time I wasn't the only one watching him. As he disappeared into the night, a dark figure emerged from across the street, following him from a distance. Someone else knew my dad Leo's secret, and they were watching him just as closely as I was. I felt my stomach drop as I watched the shadowy figure move silently behind my dad Leo, keeping just enough distance to stay unnoticed. Who was this person? Were they following him for the same reason I was, or was something even worse going on? My instinct screamed at me to stay put, but I knew I couldn't. If my dad Leo was in danger, I needed to know. I slipped out of the house, my heart pounding. As I kept to the shadows, the air was cold, but I barely felt it. My focus was locked on my dad Leo and the stranger trailing him. I followed them through empty streets. My mind racing. Was this the first time someone had followed him, or had this been happening for a while? Did he know? As we neared the abandoned building, the tension in my seat T tightened. I watched as my dad Leo slipped inside, just like the night before, but the figure hesitated. They didn't follow him in. Instead, they turned slightly, scanning the area as if searching for something or someone. I pressed myself against the wall of a nearby alley, holding my breath. My pulse was so loud in my ears I was sure they could hear it. Then, without warning, the figure took a step in my direction. Panic surged through me. Had they seen me? Were they after me instead of my dad Leo? I tried to stay perfectly still, but every instinct screamed at me to run. Then, just as I thought they were about to come for me, they pulled something from their pocket, a phone. They lifted it to their ear, muttering something I couldn't quite hear. And then they said my dad Leo's name. Hearing my dad Leo's name sent a chill down my spine. Whoever this person was, they weren't just following him out of curiosity like I was. They knew him, and they were talking about him to someone else. I strained to hear more, pressing my back against the cold brick wall, willing myself to become invisible. The figure spoke in a hushed but urgent tone. Yeah, he's inside. Now he has the package. A pause. No, he doesn't suspect anything, yet my breath caught in my throat. The package. Were they talking about the envelope from last night? Was my dad Leo delivering something for these people? Or was he working against them? Either way, this wasn't just some secret club or late-night meeting. It was something much bigger and much more dangerous than I had imagined. Then the person on the phone said something that made my blood run cold. If he doesn't follow through tonight, we handle it. Handle it. My mind raced with possibilities. None of them good. Was my dad Leo in trouble? Was he being forced into something, or worse? Was he about to do something he couldn't take back? I had to move. I had to get inside that building before it was too late. But just as I took a step forward, the person snapped their phone shut and turned their face. Finally caught the dim glow of a street lamp, and my heart nearly stopped. I knew them. I hadn't seen them in years, but their face was burned into my memory. They were from my dad Leo's past, someone he never talked about, someone he once told me to stay far away from. What were they doing here now, and why were they involved in? Whatever my dad Leo was caught up in, the weight of the truth was starting to sink in, but I wasn't ready for what came next. Because the moment I turned toward the building determined to get answers, I heard footsteps, not just one set, several. I wasn't the only one watching anymore, and this time I was the one being followed. I spun around, panic rising as I realized I wasn't alone. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. My heart raced, and for a second I felt paralyzed. Were they here for me? Was I going to be dragged into whatever mess my dad Leo was tangled in? Before I could make a move, the figure from earlier emerged from the shadows, stepping into the street lamp's glow. I didn't need to see their face clearly to recognize them. They were the one following me, and they weren't alone. Two others stood behind them, their eyes hidden beneath dark hoods. Without a word, they started walking toward me. Their movements, slow and deliberate. I knew I had no choice. If I didn't confront them now, they'd get to me first. I turned and bolted toward the abandoned building, my footsteps echoing in the empty night they followed. Just as I had followed my dad Leo, keeping their distance but never losing sight of me, the tension in my C*** T tightened with every step. I was running out of time. I reached the door to the building and yanked it open, slipping inside. The dim lights from before flickered above me as I moved deeper into the building, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I had to find my dad Leo before they did. Suddenly I heard voices, my dad Leo's voice among them. I hurried toward the sound, my heart leaping in my throat. I rounded a corner, and there he was standing in the center of the room, holding the same thick envelope. But he wasn't alone. The person I had recognized earlier, the one from his past, was standing right beside him, smiling. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't a random meeting, and it wasn't some forced situation. My dad Leo had been involved with them all along. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks, but before I could say anything, the doors slammed shut behind me. The three figures who had been chasing me now blocked the exit. "You should have stayed out of this," one of them said. I looked to my dad Leo, searching for an explanation, but he was silent. The envelope in his hands shook slightly. Then in a voice I barely recognized, my dad Leo spoke. "It was always meant to be this way." I stared at him in disbelief, struggling to process the words. But then, just as the tension reached its peak, the sound of sirens filled the air. Everything froze. The sound of sirens was deafening, drowning out everything else. The figures blocking the door froze, their eyes flicking toward the windows. I could see the panic begin to spread across their faces, but no one moved. I didn't understand what was happening. Why were the sirens here? Why was my dad Leo standing with these people, seemingly accepting whatever dark world they were part of? The tension in the room was suffocating for a moment. It felt like time itself had stopped. I looked at my dad Leo again, searching for some kind of reassurance. But all I saw was the weight of his secret, a secret that had been building for years, one I hadn't been ready to uncover. Then one of the figures turned to my dad Leo, their voice low and urgent. "You promised us. James, you promised you'd handle this." My dad Leo didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath, the envelope still in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect it to come to this, but I had no choice." The door behind me suddenly burst open, and officers stormed in their uniforms, unmistakable in the dim light. I stepped back, unable to comprehend what was happening. The room filled with chaos as the officers moved, swiftly, cuffing the figures who had been surrounding my dad Leo. I turned to him, my heart pounding in my C*******T. "What is this, dad Leo? What have you been involved in?" He finally met my gaze, his expression conflicted. "I never wanted you to know about this world," he said softly, but I couldn't escape it. "There were things, dangerous things, and I made a choice to protect you from them." The police officer in charge came over, his face grim. "He's been working undercover for years. We needed him to infiltrate this group, and he did. He just never expected it would put his family at risk." I blinked, stunned. My dad Leo wasn't a criminal, he was a hero, but he had been playing a dangerous game in the shadows, doing things I couldn't even imagine, all to protect me and everyone else. As they led the others away, I stood there trying to make sense of it all. My dad Leo wasn't perfect. He had his flaws, and he had his secrets, but in the end he'd done it all for love for us. As the sirens faded into the distance, I knew that this would change everything. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: the truth had come out, and it was more complicated than I ever could have imagined. And as we walked away from the building side by side, I knew I had to trust him no matter how dark the past had been. If you enjoyed this suspenseful story and want to hear more, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more thrilling content.